Hey guys, so it's Dolores and we are doing another Latinx author character read review vlog video. So this is the beginning of it. If you are looking at the playlist or anything, I did change it, and I think I'm going to start referring to it as Latinx author character R&R vlogs. Or video, depending on if it becomes more of a vlog than a video. So, because I was trying again to figure out how to get a smaller title, and it just came to me. I think because I've been listening to some people's query stories, and everyone's talking about R&Rs, and I'm like, play on words. But, so, what are we doing? We are doing Ramon and Julieta, Love and Tacos, #1. So, this is by Alana Gutierrez Albertson. I don't know if I said that correctly. I met her at the Festival of Books. If you want to know more about that, I can leave that in the cards. And I have a playlist the whole weekend, but I met her on the second day, I believe. I will tag the correct video. And if I'm too lazy, it will just be the playlist, and I'm sorry, you'll have to figure it out on your own. Well, I guess if you look at the time codes, it would tell you. So, so I met her, and she is also someone within the Latinx community, and we started talking because she had mentioned something about being Mexican American and how it's kind of a different feeling, a different situation. You kind of grow up differently than children that are coming from Mexico or Mexico, or children that are still raised in a very strong Mexican family. But when you are Mexican American and you are further along in the chain of family and farther away from that immigration story, your situation and your life is different, but it's also weird, especially living like in this area of the country where we're right up against Mexico, and so many people just assume that you are from Mexico or like maybe you're first generation. There's a lot of assumptions people make, and I've talked a lot about this in many of my videos. But she had mentioned it, and she had mentioned that that was inspiration for this book series. She wanted to make a series that represented us, represented her, how she saw her heritage, how she viewed everything. So it made me really excited. And then when I talked to her a little bit more, she kind of continued that. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to check out the book and perhaps put it in the series. Now, I've mentioned in the video for the festival that I don't like Romeo and Juliet. I think the story is overrated. I am not big on a lot of hype things. Like my conditions for my husband when he was going to propose to me was he couldn't do it on my birthday, couldn't do it on holidays. I thought it was cliche. I hated it. And being the jokester that he was like, okay, and then proposed to me the day before a holiday, just to be like, didn't say holiday, it's not a holiday, because he's my little bee. But I'm very much that kind of person where if something is very overly hyped, I'm kind of just like, no. I've never watched The Notebook up to this point. I know all about it. I know pretty much everything, the whole series, to relate to people and jokes, but I have never sat down and watched it because I thought it was a very overhyped, like to the nth degree love story, and I was just like, this is dumb. The story idea itself was good, but I just think it was overhyped, and I'm just not that person to jump on a hype train a lot of the times. There are times like superhero stuff, sci-fi things that just jam with me more, but Romeo and Juliet is one of those things where I'm just like, this is not a cute story. It's lame. Why is everyone romanticizing this? This is stupid. And thankfully, my teacher in school was like, we're not going to read that. We're going to explore other Shakespearean stories. And I read other Shakespearean stories instead of the obvious ones, like Romeo and Juliet, which was nice. But that also means I have never actually read the play. I know everything about it, very much like the Notebook. I know details for the most part. So I understand the concept of the story. So at first, I was like, I don't know if I want to read this. If it's supposed to be a retelling, I think she called it a retelling, Romeo and Juliet. But the more I read the blurb, I was like, you know what? I'll give it a try. I am probably never going to read Romeo and Juliet because, again, I don't care for it. But maybe I'll read this. So, let me read to you the back blurb thing. And I am reading this off of the story graph and its description on there. So, when fate and tacos bring Ramon and Julieta together on the Day of the Dead, the star-crossed pair must make a choice: accept the bitter food rivalry that drives them apart, or surrender to a love that consumes them. Perfect for fans of Jane the Virgin. I never watched that. I thought it was stupid also. The more I heard about it, I was like, this is really stupid. But besides that, so that's the hook thing. So the actual description is: Ramon Montes always achieves his goals, whether that means collecting Ivy League degrees or growing his father's fast food empire. Nothing sets Ramon off course. So when the sexy señorita who kissed him on the Day of the Dead runs off into the night with his heart, he's determined to do whatever it takes to find her again. Celebrity chef Juanita Campos has sacrificed everything to save her sea-to-table taqueria from closing. To her horror, she discovers that her new landlord is none other than the magnetic mariachi she hooked up with on Dia de los Muertos. Even worse, it was his father who stole her mother's taco recipe decades ago. Juanita has no choice but to work with Ramon, the man who destroyed her life's work and the man who tempts and inspires her. As San Diego's outraged community protests against the Taco King takeover and the divide between their families grow, Ramon and Juanita struggle to balance the rising tensions. But Ramon knows that true love is priceless, and despite all his success, this is the one battle he refuses to lose. So, I will tell you what has sold me on this book: food and the Day of the Dead. If you know anything about me on this channel, for whatever reason, I am obsessed with the concept of death, the dead gods. If you watch my Pokemon videos, I love ghost type Pokemon, all about that life. So, I was like, you know what? I will go for it. Mostly because, again, haven't fully read Romeo and Juliet. This seems much more like a hate to love relationship, or like right between enemies, hate to lovers relationship, versus the Romeo and Juliet aspect of our families hate each other, but we love each other. That is what it seems like. I like that more than Romeo and Juliet route. So, this is what we're reading. And I have already started listening to it because, of course, I never do this intro before I start listening to it because I don't have patience. I also don't know how to schedule. Chaos, remember, that is our brand. But I like it so far. I like the voice acting because, of course, I'm listening to it as I do most of the books that I read. The voice acting is nice. I like it. The speech and announcing of the Spanish words are really good so far. And I have gotten to the point where they have met. They meet very soon. I'm at 7% in the book because I just updated the progress before I did this. It's 7% in the book. They've already met. It is the Dia de los Muertos. It is the Day of the Dead, and they're in costume. This is how they don't know who they are, and it's cute. It's slightly, I wouldn't say cliche. I'd say it's slightly cringe, but in like the cutest way possible. Meet cute glory. But I've already connected to both of them in different ways through the like struggle of like Mexican American life. Though Juanita is first generation Mexican from the way the intro to her sounds. It sounds like she's first generation, where Ramon seems like he's more farther along, at least second generation. So, which on my mother's side, that would be me. On my father's side, we're like way farther. So that's from their background stories at the beginning. That's what it sounds like, which I have no problem with. But again, I'm resonating with them for two very different reasons. So far, it's good. But yeah, that's really all I have to say. Introducing the book, let you know what it's about. Of course, you're gonna see this after this is over. For the future, even if it doesn't go well this time, I have posted in my Kofi, and I will do this for the next book also, that I announced what book I was reading, and I put up the page, and we are going to be doing live discussions. I'm going to figure out with this book how we're going to break that down, but we'll have live discussions in the comments, and it's only going to be available for members, unfortunately. Mostly because you're going to get all of my thoughts anyways here free from a video. But if you want real-time feedback, discussions, and pre-news about it, I feel like it's fair for me to put it as a member tier, as like a read-along, and then the public who doesn't want to or can't still gets the same thing, just after I'm done with the book. So next time, if you want, my Kofi is down below, and I'll remind again at the end of the video, but my Kofi is down below if you want to follow and wait until I pop up and be like, oh, this is the next book, we're doing it, and then pay then, or however you would choose to figure it out. But yeah, so that's it. I will see you next time for another update of what is happening. So yeah, I feel good about this so far. I feel good about it. Hello and welcome back. That sounded weird. Whatever, we're continuing. So I have finished Ramon and Julieta, the first Love and Tacos in this series, and I finished it on Thursday, which would have been the 28th, that night. First of all, I thought it was going to take me a little bit longer to finish this book because it's taken me a while to finish a couple of the other ones. Camilla Ola I did finish it decently quick, but it still took me, I think, like 2 months at least. So I did do the intro to this video and then put it down because I had some library pre-orders that I wanted to get done first. And I do own the audiobook of this through Libo FM, which, if you don't know, just off sidebar, Libo FM is a service where you can buy audiobooks, and they support independent bookstores, much like bookshop.com, which I am an affiliate for. I am not an affiliate for Libro because it's hard to be an affiliate for them, but I will have a referral code down below if you want to use that. But because I owned it, I was like, I'll just pick it back up later. My goal is to finish the book before Hispanic Heritage Month so I can, at minimum, post it then. After I read my library orders, I was like, let's go ahead. Let's do this. So I picked it back up and started listening to it, and I legitimately finished it. I want to say in a week and a half, maybe a little bit less. It was amazing. So I know I gave You Had Me at Hola a good rating. I felt connected to the main character, the female lead, because she was Puerto Rican American, I guess. I feel like that's weird to say, but she had grown up here in America. These two characters, Ramon and Julieta, are actually Mexican American, and in different ways, I 100% connected to them. We start the book at my favorite ethnic holiday, Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. If you watched my review of The Cemetery Boys, I talked about a lot about Dia de los Muertos and kind of the history-ish behind that, why I loved it and how I respected it. Here, Alina Albertine 100% did the same thing in a different way because it wasn't a center focus unlike Cemetery Boys. There is respect, there is truth of a culture, but she also points out how much America kind of does to every ethnic holiday, for every ethnicity, it's become twisted. And they do reference it and mention that. But for our characters, it definitely means what it is, the celebration, the remembrance, the honor of our ancestors and our loved ones. So they meet on the Day of the Dead, and they're both in full costume, or at least dressed up. She is dressed up as in a white dress, and he is dressed up in a mariachi outfit, and they both have face painting, the classic, I can put a picture up, the classic skull face paintings to symbolize your acceptance of death, and that you laugh at the death in the sense of that it's the end when it's not. From there, they kick off. They don't know who they are until a couple of chapters later, and then it kicks off with the buying of the land, and then a bunch of other shenanigans show up. I enjoyed the effort and the respect and the understanding that was in this story. There were multiple times, for multiple reasons, why I felt connected to the characters. I felt connected more to Ramon for the reason that it sounds like he is second, third generation Mexican American in his house. So very much like me, we are separated from that immigration story. On the other hand, Julieta is first generation Mexican American. Her parents immigrated from Mexico and came to America. So there were certain things that Julieta pointed out about growing up in like the barrio, in the neighborhood, and being a part of her culture that I connected to ish. But in reality, I connected more to Ramon because as you become more ingrained into the American culture, as you become more separated from the immigration story, you do not have the same ties to the homeland. And a lot of other cultures have that same thing happen. The further the children are from the story of immigration, whether you're coming from um, Italy or Ireland or Scotland or Germany or any of those stories. So Ramon is that for me. I am many removed from the immigration story. I am third or fourth generation on my mother's side, and on my father's side, we became American because the border went over my family. My family lived in the same area for many years before they moved into Tucson, which was an up and coming town at the time, or at least closer to Tucson. But we lived further south, not in Nogales, but further south in a small village, and they stayed there when the U.S. signed the Treaty of Guadalupe, and we suddenly became American. So there was even an immigration story there on my father's side, on one side of his side. So there is that understanding. I have had very few times where I've gone to Mexico. I don't speak Spanish, but both of them do. The way Elena places Spanish in the book, she uses it as points of emphasis. So the book is obviously written in English, and we don't 100% know what is the speaking wise with the characters. So, like, when my mom and my grandmother speak, even though my mom was like 2 or so generations past immigration, so she was still, she grew up with her grandmother, uh, her grandmother, so she grew up speaking Spanish, and that was her first language, and she had to go through classes just like if she was a first generation. And when she speaks to her mother-in-law, my other grandmother, they tend to just naturally migrate into Spanish unless they want us to be part of the conversation. So I am aware that that happens in a lot of cultures. And I feel like because you can't do that in a book that's English, she takes it as a point of reference and emphasis when she chooses to suddenly change languages in the book. So I would assume in a real world situation, Julieta and her mother probably primarily speak Spanish to each other, even though obviously in the book they speak English. But there are more times where she flips to Spanish and says like a sentence in Spanish or something along those lines. So I enjoyed that versus in a couple of other books, Spanish is used as, so you had me at hola. Spanish is only referenced in the sense of the TV show, and then in Cemetery Boys, Spanish is referenced between the main character and the grandparent as well. So it's definitely tied much more to this old culture, while everyone else primarily speaks English with a couple of words just randomly thrown in there. And I believe that's very realistic for how many people speak, especially as many cultures, when they come here, they want their descendants to speak English. They want them to have that primary language because we are no longer in the motherland, and for whatever reason that they left, we are now here, and this is the language that is important. Especially when those first immigrants were coming over from Europe, they very strongly felt that way. That's why many people don't speak Celtic, and many people don't speak Italian, because the families wanted to just wash that away and out of their culture. So that is, she uses it very well, because again, I feel like this was the most I've had Spanish placed into the story. Next to You Had Me at Hola, but it was still very strategically placed for the reference of the plot, versus here it was much more used as character and used as a way for us to understand the relationships between the characters. I greatly enjoyed that. I loved it. We're going to pause here. If you don't want to know spoilers, I'm going to give a little bit more in-depth of things that I liked, things that I enjoyed. So there will be a cutoff, and I will have my timestamps always down below so you can skip to the end of the spoilers. Also, I'll put time code here just in case you want to do it the hard way and just move the thing over. But we're going to end right here. Spoiler territory. Oh. So spoilers. I wrote in the bookmark function of FM Libo, you can put notes on your bookmarks. So I took a couple of notes on here, and then just other things that I remembered. Again, before I even look at notes, I loved the Day of the Dead. Every time she referenced something, there was a reason to it, and occasionally she talked about it, because I personally have looked into a little bit more the Day of the Dead. I did see more things that she didn't specifically point out, but it was still wonderful. So in chapter 8, Ramon is talking about how he had like an identity crisis, or no. In chapter 8, he's having. So in chapter 8, Ramon realizes that or at least it's obvious to the reader, or at least to me it was, that he's having an identity crisis, and he doesn't realize why or what it's about. And at this point, this is when he has already met Julieta. He thinks, not that they use love yet, but like he's in love with her. He's drawn to her. And it puts into perspective the area. And we already have references at this point to him telling us about how his father was a freedom fighter, and he protested and held rallies there to preserve certain historical events and monuments and murals. So he has a connection. His family also lives there. His father's brother, who is very upset at his father for being a sellout and overly commercializing their business. They don't really want anything to do with them, and they think that they're the brothers, because there's 3 of them, aren't actually connected to their culture. Now, being with Julieta, this is the first time he's actually taking a step back and seeing the street and the neighborhood through the eyes of someone who deeply loves it, but is also willing to share. And that's the difference between her and his cousin. We meet his cousin at the beginning and towards the end of the book. He's kind of just not in the story in the middle. And At the beginning, we meet the cousin. The cousin is mad at him. They hate that the idea that they're going to buy the street and they're going to put a Taco King in there, and saying that they don't understand and the people don't want that. And that's it. It's the end of the conversation we have with him. He is referenced, Ramon mentions him to Julieta later in the story, but we don't actually see or meet him. And he talks about memories he had with his uncle and his aunt, his Theo, and with his cousin as well. Fond memories, but also to me, I would say slightly painful, because besides his cousins and cousins' friends, other Hispanic people have ridiculed him, not just for his money, but for the fact that he had a very privileged, a very American upbringing. And they mentioned a lot about calling him a coconut. Now, I have not personally been called a coconut, but I've been called very similar things because I don't speak Spanish, and I'm not so tied in with the culture as many other people in the Tucson area. Because being that I work there, I went to high school in Tucson, I went to college in Tucson. I drive into Tucson to work there, especially when I was working full time. And there are a lot of Hispanic people that work there. And there's also just people we have patients from the Hispanic area who don't know English. And I have that language barrier with them because I don't speak Spanish. I was not taught Spanish. My parents wanted us to know English. And it was obvious at an early age because of my dyslexia and problems. I was having a hard enough time learning English, and it wasn't beneficial for me to be taught two languages when I was struggling with just one. I kind of lost my drive to learn Spanish in high school, upper middle school, where I kind of was I didn't necessarily care. And I definitely, during that time, was a time that I was most disconnected to the culture. And I started looking at roots of the culture. So this brings us to another point where Ramon talks about finding, and Elena talks about this in her author's note at the end of the book too, where when she was in college, and Ramon mentions when he was in college, this is when he refound his heritage and his culture. So after high school, I started wanting to learn more about my culture as a whole, because I didn't really connect to Mexico and like the Mexican culture. I'm aware that Mexican literally just means like a mixture or a mutt. It was a name given to children that were born from white Spanish nobility to the children of the native Aztecs or whatever native tribes were there. I wanted to know more at the beginning, a little bit at the end of high school, and then at the beginning of college. I tried to learn a little bit more about Spain, and I kind of looked into a little bit of things. But what really ended up catching me more, which makes sense because I tend to love mythology a lot. If you watch any of my other videos, you will see me reference that. I fell into the whole of wanting to learn more about the Aztec culture. From then on to now, I'm still trying to learn more about Aztec culture and the religion and society. Part of the reason why I learned more about Dia de los Muertos is because it is a celebration, a holiday that the Mexican people have taken, that is inspired by a celebration that the Aztecs did for very similar reasons. And then, of course, because again, Spain, the Mexican people infusing with Spain took it a step forward, kind of melding it in with All Souls, All Saints Day within the Catholic Christian Church. So I felt very connected along those lines because I too later on tried and found a new way to perceive the culture, a new way of connecting and wanting to be a part of that culture. Later on, when they're pretty much becoming a couple, and Julieta is doubting herself, and why would Ramon want to be with her? He's a multimillionaire. He could have anybody he wants. Why does he want me? Some poor girl on the wrong side of the tracks kind of situation. For her, she references the wrong side of the freeway because there's a freeway that literally separates them. So she talks about how she never was the classic female Mexican. She never got into hair or makeup or fancy clothes. She would rather be outside in the dirt playing with the boys. And I relate to that, including with my sister, where we're definitely not that. I was a little bit more of a girly girl than my sister, who stayed a tomboy until about high school, and she realized boys were cute and were not just friends, but could be other things. We were also, both of us, very willing to go outside and do things. We grew up, it was a dead ranch, but we did grow up on a ranch and had to work outside to a certain extent. And we were okay with my sister doing even more. She is a mechanic, or at least she has a degree in mechanic. And I understood that feeling because I too am not someone who fell into the whole of makeup and needing to be plastered on all the time. My mother, depending on the financial situation, she loves to be that way. Also, not to the extreme that Julieta talks about and her mother tries to push her to, but definitely I was like, this is very classic. I have many Mexican women who come to the hospital and need to put makeup on in the morning, and I'm like, if it makes you feel better, okay, but you realize you're in the hospital. So I could understand that, and that was one of the few things I did relate to Julieta. So I kind of referenced this, but again, that idea that Ramon is not one of them, he is not Mexican. In chapter 23, there is a point where Ramon's father has backstabbed him, and while Ramon is, serenading, not literally, but serenading Julieta, and they're becoming a couple, his father backstabs him and sends out an email to all the tenants on the street saying that rent is going to be increased an astronomical amount. Before Ramon was ready, as even though he has been getting distracted, he's also been trying to figure out a way to make everybody happy. And Julieta finds out before Ramon does, and the family tell her and the people on the street, and people are very angry and very upset and very mad, and her cousin comes to her and says that he's not one of us, and he's just a coconut, he's just a rich dark-skinned Ken doll. And again, as I talked about, I do understand that idea of everyone just assumes you're one way, and the moment they know who you are, they're like, oh, you're just fake. So I very much related to that pain that Ramon had to deal with actually multiple times in the book. And even though it he acknowledged it, it didn't hold him down. I do wish that, I know he's an adult and he's supposed to understand things more, but I wish that it was held, that pain was acknowledged more and held onto, and how disrespectful that is when he wasn't trying to be outright disrespectful to anybody on the street or anything. Also, that idea of like they don't trust him because he's white, he's Americanized, and he's not Mexican. When they are in America, they might be living in a barrio surrounded by other people of their culture, but they're not in Mexico. So there is that idea, and Ramon does mention a couple times where he's like, things have to change and we have to expand and we have to grow. You can't just leave a people and a culture stagnated. So I enjoyed that because I feel like that was definitely a reference to us, to like him, where they are integrating into the culture of America more, just like people who came before us from Europe, because they were the first immigrants, the people from Ireland, from Italy, from Germany, all those areas that came over for a new life. They all immigrated to certain degrees. I mean, the French people who came over to the South, they immigrated so much that they over-immigrated. And we have people that developed their own language in the Creole, however you say that. You understand what I mean, like the swamp people in like New Orleans and stuff. Not New Orleans, Louisiana. There we go. So there are those layers and ideas and understanding that I definitely understood, and I enjoyed that they were referenced and talked about and not just swept under the rug, because it is painful. And when people have mentioned to me that, you know, I'm fake, or I'm not real, or you're Mexican, why don't you speak Spanish? And I'm just like, but I'm not. I was born here. I grew up here. Like that, I'm not in Mexico. So I greatly enjoyed and acknowledged it. I thought I wrote it down in a bookmark, but I guess I didn't. There was a point where Julieta's mother, also to understand this point, Julieta's mother and Ramon's father were in love when they were younger. He had went down on vacation for summer break to Mexico, where she lived, and they had met and fallen in love and all this stuff. And when he came back to marry her, she had moved on because it had taken him a really long time to get there. And I think there was some other things because Julieta's mom mentioned that the letters just stopped, but Ramon's father mentioned that he was constantly sending her letters. So I have a feeling there was some unknown parental on Julieta's side muddling to get her to move on from this American boy. So I just wanted to put that as a sidebar because I feel like I noticed that. I could have been reading too much into the story, but so that happened. When he found them, he got really angry. He stole her recipe, and then that's how he grew Taco King. But so she's hurt from that, not in the sense of like the painful, like summer love was over, but she truly loved Julieta's father. She did move on. Unlike Ramon's father, I feel like he never actually moved on. But it did instill some painful prejudices. And there is a point where Julieta decides to date Ramon, but they're not boyfriend and girlfriend yet. They're just dating them and acknowledge that they have feelings. They like each other. And Julieta's mother says, fine, but don't sleep with him. Don't fall in love with him because he is not good for you. A marriage is hard at the best of times, which is true. And a marriage is something, you should marry someone who is the same as you. And I hated that. She referenced like they have the same values, they have the same vision, they have to have the same along those lines. I can't remember all the points that she said. I hated it, especially because I have an interracial marriage. My husband is white. He's Italian American, but he's, for all intents and purposes, he's white and I am Hispanic. And if I were to follow like Julieta's advice, we would never get married because really the only thing that we had in common was that our religion. But everything else is different. And that's been things that we've had to go through and learn and compromise with each other, or him accept something from me and I accept something from him. And that kind of relationship where you learn from each other and use each other to grow together is more valuable than a relationship where you're just, the status quo. And Julieta mentions that, where she's like, isn't it important to grow together in a relationship and learn from each other? And her mom just continues to stick her point, not really even listening to what Julieta has to say. And I hated it, which was the point. I get that was the point. But yeah. So that's the end of the spoiler section, my like detailed part of the review. So we're gonna join everybody else. Okay, so we're back. So in conclusion, my general feelings. What did I also rate the book? I love this. This was a great representation of Mexican American life in two different perspectives. Someone who is closer to the immigration story and someone who is not, someone who is much more Americanized. I think they were great representations, besides the class system, which I'm not even going to mention. It was very good, very great. I also loved that if you read to the end or listen to the end, if you're listening to it in an audiobook like I do, Elena puts an author's note and talks about why she wrote this book, talks about how much more this book meant to her, because it felt like it was a part of her, and talking about her feelings, how she wrote Ramon in reference to her, like I said earlier, about learning about your culture later in life, finding connection in college. So she explains some historical points that took place in Barrio Logan, and that it's a real place and these real things happened, and these are the backdrops of the story that she wrote. She didn't have to do that, and I think that was very important and very, very meaningful that she did that. So in the end, this had great representation. This was unapologetic. I felt seen, I felt understood, and I even felt called out to a certain extent. And all of it was okay. All of it was with respect. You could tell there was heart in when she wrote this. And she, again, in her own author note, she mentioned how nervous she was to just send it to her agent. No, just to put the first sentence down of the book. I respect it so much. And maybe I respect it a little bit more because I did talk to her a little bit before I even read the book. But even before that, I loved it so much. Also, I have to say, because this is about the representation. This is an adult romance. There was plenty of sexual interaction between this. The tension was high. They only had on-page intercourse 3 times, different types, 3 times, but there is a lot of references. Ramon talks about her bosom and other areas. Julieta talks about his shaft multiple times, like in their minds, they're like daydreaming, and then that self-slap of like, focus. They do that a lot. So they only had sex 3 times. There's plenty of references. So it's a decent steam. When they do have sex, it is nice. But so to accumulate all this, I initially wrote down in my notes that I ended up not actually writing, that I will have to write to do an actual word review on Storygraph, but I put down a 4.75 because Storygraph lets you do that. And I really thought about it, and I might be biased, but you know what? I'm not biased very often. I feel like personally, since starting this channel, being a little bit wanting to be a little bit more thoughtful, I'm giving this a 5. Would I read this again? Yes. Am I going to read this again? Most likely. And I am looking forward to her next Love and Tacos. I'm hoping this could be a whole other story, but she kind of slides set in one of the brothers with maybe Julieta's cousin, maybe. But maybe the other brother with a male friend or cousin? Question mark. There wasn't too much, but I just was like, can I have that Hispanic gay romance cousin? Thank you. So, I'm greatly looking forward to it. I'm loving the references that she could do, the parts of our heritage she could touch on. So I'm giving this a 5. I'm giving this a 5. Some people might say otherwise, and some people might say I'm being biased for cultural reasons, and because I met the author. I don't care. I loved it. You should read it if you want to read a book that has good representation, good Mexican American representation, good Hispanic representation. Read it. It is worth it. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of that. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to know the next book I'm reading for this series, I will let my Kofi members know first. So if you want to know, you can become a member for $2. I do take my time because I don't want to burn out. I tried to do an actual set time frame. It wasn't good. For sure, I will always have one book that will be set up to publish during Hispanic Heritage Month. I will also say at the end of this book or video, I do have a secret one that I will be reading because it's an arc. I will be letting my Kofi members know what it is, but we won't be doing a read along. After that, whatever the next one is, I will be trying to do the read along. I tried with this one, obviously failed. I don't have any actual members, so it's okay. But if you're curious, want to do read alongs with Latinx characters or from authors, then join my Kofi. Links are down below to be a member, and you'll have access to that. Also, if you have recommendations of what I should read, then let me know down below. My only thing that I really am not comfortable with reading, you can leave the link, you can leave the suggestions, but I probably won't touch it, is anything with horror. If it's like a mystery thriller with like a little bit of horror, I might read it. But if it is a horror book, I won't read it. I don't like horror. I don't like watching it. I don't like reading it. I'm a chicken. So you can leave those down below if you're interested. But again, if you want to know first before I put up the video, or I spoil myself on social media because I loved it, then join my Kofi and you will get the video first. You'll get the announcement first, the read along, the video out first. And yeah, so again, thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. For watching this, the chaos, because I'm a storyteller and this is how I choose to tell my story and talk about other people's stories. I'll see you later. Tell stories and